everyone. This is update for November 7, 2024, day 988 of the war and of the data update. Also catch up for all of the dates since November 2nd. So I'm going to do a little bit of, not a little bit, but quite a bit of macroeconomic update, and then I'm going to switch to the situation on the battlefield in Ukraine. So there was quite a bit of important news, economic news coming out, mostly actually out of the US, but I want to mention China just to continue providing updates on what's going on in China. Essentially at this point, the main focus is really just export imports, Chinese exports and imports, and sort of manufacturing PMI, which reflects that to some, basically corroborating evidence for that. So China released new data for exports, and as you can see, it was pretty good for China. Export jumped 12.7%. Imports actually declined. So this is nearly ideal situation when your revenue goes up, your expenses go down. So your net income is going up, which is net income is actual wealth generation, improvement in life standards, and that's something that feels everybody in the society. So as you can see, that's trade balance is essentially that net income. So you can see jump from 81 billion to 95 billion. And then there's manufacturing PMI, which also showed slightly improvement in China. So it's probably reflecting this pickup in export orders that China receiving. So the summary of the situation is the same what was mentioned before. China is moving along. They switched to its sort of tried and true source of wealth generation, which is export, and it actually works for them for right now. There is a totally devastated internal real estate market where there's probably quite a bit of zombie bankruptcies that are sort of hanging up there and not being sort of public yet. The consumer is not in the best shape, but otherwise exports are working, and then I'm sure China will continue this course because that's something that really works for them and actually improves standard of living and increasing wealth of China, and actually increasing its military capabilities as well and its influence around the world. So this is the most sort of rational and the most efficient and effective strategy for China going forward, and I'm sure that this will be sort of pushed to the fullest extent by Chinese leadership. Now let's switch to the US. There's quite a lot of happened in US. So first, I want to catch up from prior week where there was a lot of labor statistic or job market statistics that came out of the US. And there are two primary sources. One is government one, which is called here BLS, non-farm employment. So it stands for Bureau of I think Labor Statistics. So that's October data. It showed increase in the number of jobs by 12,000. And that's really a bad sort of number because the way it was the only source of increase is essentially government creation of governmental jobs, which for regular viewers, I explained many times that this is essentially a net negative for society. And it doesn't create any value add. It's basically expense. So it's definitely so if you remove that, then based on this statistics, the job creation was negative in October in the US, and then also if you add to that healthcare, which again similar negative burden on the society, because all it means that there is a problem with health in the society. Otherwise, you essentially you don't want to grow this area. So again, if you see that's roughly 100,000, or to be precisely 92,000. So if we remove this two counterproductive areas, you're getting deeply negative number. And it actually, for example, reflected in manufacturing, which is down 46,000 jobs. So this is, and I'll come back to this manufacturing. But as you can see, the number looks pretty ugly, actually. Especially if you look at it, not just purely quantitatively, but qualitatively, analyze the situation, what's sort of under the hood. I would say it's nearly horrific. The sort of the positive in this situation is that this number is based on governmental surveys, and it's small sample size. I would say it's very small. I think it's like 60,000 basically companies and or governmental entities, also various entities, let's put this way. So I would say relatively to size of the US economy, it's actually pretty small. And then actually, interestingly, BLS, which is government agency, is planning to reduce that number even further in 2025, which obviously will reduce reliability of this number even more. So in summary, this was negative number, but I would say there is quite a bit of questions whether how reliable this number is. And then I want to switch to sort of to opposite of the BLS non-farm employment number, which is, as I stated, created by government. This is actually created by private industry. It's ADP, which is largest, I believe, payroll processing company, or basically that's the company that through which payments happen to employees in the U.S. economy, and I believe they process roughly 18 million payroll payments or salary payments. So it's 18 million workers in the U.S. who receive their salaries or wages through ADP. That's much more representative sample, as you can imagine. 18 million versus 60,000. There is much more credibility from my perspective in ADP number. And I would say if I have to choose, I'd probably go with ADP number. And that number is really showing that there is significant increase in private employment, which is again also does not consider governmental job creation, which, as I stated, is really burden on the society. It does have include though healthcare job creation, but generally speaking, it's a much more reliable and better quality metric of what's really going on in the economy. In actually, I would say value producing economy, let's put this way, because government is really redistribution of created wealth. So it's essentially you paying someone to distribute something that's already been produced, and it's essentially net negative, because then that surplus that's being redistributed is even becoming less, because government is consuming for itself a portion of that surplus. So, but going back to this ADP, it looked very good, actually extraordinarily good. However, there's one negative there, and it's consistent with this BLS non-farm employment, which shows that manufacturing lost a good amount of jobs. So that's a very consistent theme. Generally in the West, it's not just U.S. just because U.S. is this number, so I'm discussing it. But there is no manufacturing renaissance in the U.S. and all of the claims actually by Russian propaganda that U.S. is stealing manufacturing from Europe is absolutely false, because you would see totally different picture. Certainly, those that manufacturing that Europe is losing, and mostly Germany, it's actually either permanently destroyed, or it probably is going somewhere else. I would surmise, let's say, Asia, and it's clearly not going to the US. That is something that's very, very clear from all of these numbers. But I would say, again, going back to these numbers, to this situation, it's very clear that US is losing manufacturing. That it's not, what this truly means is that US is not competitive on the world scene in terms of conditions for manufacturing. So therefore, manufacturers are either dying or as well fleeing US, the same as they fleeing Europe. So I would say probably better way to describe this is that manufacturers are fleeing West. That's probably the best summary of this whole situation, because it's more or less the same picture across Europe and in North America. Probably the only exception would be South Korea and Japan. Those two countries not really losing manufacturing and actually excel at manufacturing, especially South Korea. So that's a summary of this job market situation. Then the corroborating sort of evidence is this S&P service PMI for October, which also shows that service sector is growing in the U.S. because it's above 50. So below 50, it's shrinking, and above 50, it's increasing size. So again, this I would say there is sort of contradicting evidence, but I would say that ADP is much more reliable, much more representative sample than BLS employment numbers. And then there's a little bit more governmental employment data. But I would say this data is, and that's the reason why I'm bringing it here, is because it's pretty reliable. This is unemployment payments. So basically, it's unemployment payments to people who lost jobs. So you essentially, this is not some surveys. It's people actually getting paid by the government because they are unemployed. So this is fairly realistic and reliable numbers because they're actually getting payments. And so, they're going to get payments soon. So there's initial jobless claims. So this is people who are just freshly were laid off. And specifically, if you look at non-seasonally adjusted number, it remains fairly low, I would say. So there is not much of layoffs going on in the U.S. in the economy. But continuing jobless claims, it means that these people who were laid off in prior periods, specifically cut off here October 26, and then they just continuing receiving their payments. And here you definitely see increase in number of these people. I think if I go back, so from October 5th, for example, we see it's 1.596, now at 1.653. So it's very clear increase in number of people who remain unemployed, which goes to what I said before, that there is not much of a new jobs creation. There's not many employment opportunities in the U.S. So therefore, it's hard. It's hard to find a job if you got laid off. It's difficult to find job, and that's really what all this is saying here. And that's kind of like a little bit not corroborating actually this number for October from ADP, at least we're seeing this build up that's actually not supportive of ADP, but actually supporting more of BLS, although not as gloomy as sort of BLS. So I would say the truth is probably somewhere between this sort of non-corroborating, contradicting numbers. I personally believe that ADP is more closer to the truth in the situation. The other item I want to mention is governmental debt, and as of November 6, it went almost to 36 trillion, so it's 35.9 trillion. Over October, I checked, it's very quick amount, quick or increase in the borrowings by the U.S. government. Basically, over October, which was the first months of the sort of new fiscal year in the U.S., U.S. federal government borrowed roughly $500 billion of U.S. dollars, and that really translates to extremely significant borrowing of if you just do run rate, it's going to be 6 trillion, which is insane number, and obviously non-sustainable. Most likely this is something one-off. I'm not sure what's the big driver for this borrowing. It's really huge and outlier months for sure. But anyways, the start, even let's assume that the typical run rate for the US is 2 trillion, let's say, or 1.8 trillion, 1.9, like what it used to be in prior year. Essentially, in 1 month, you did 1.5 out of 2, so it's roughly 25%. That's a huge problem, let's put this way, and it's actually reflecting in the interest rates that jumped in the US, specifically long-term interest rates. For in the US, its key interest rate is a 10-year treasury. It's basically government borrows for 10 years from the investors, whoever wants to, or lenders, whoever wants to invest in the U.S. government, basically lend U.S. government for 10 years, and that jumps significantly, which usually that is very slow moving market, and the jump in the cost of borrowing, basically interest rates went up. I think it was like from 4.2 to 4.4 or 4.45% in very short period of time. I think like 1 week or 2 weeks. Again, the market is getting much more concerned about this unsustainable situation in the US with the governmental debt, and essentially it's basically it's flashing, I would say, nearly red light to the US government, saying that okay, you need to slow down or rates are gonna really jump up, and that will sort of suffocate and prevent you from continuing borrowing, because interest expense is going to be prohibitive for the US government to continue borrowing at the level it is borrowing. And this is why I mentioned in while ago in prior videos that whoever is going to be US president is going to face, I would say, fiscal crisis probably that that person will have to deal. And at this point, we know that this is it's Donald Trump. So he will have to deal with that situation in the coming years, and we'll see how it's going to play out. It's very little sort of know right now at this point about his economic policy, and generally whole strategy, whole policy. One thing, the only one thing is clear is that he's trying to make significant reforms in terms of bureaucracy, which is good sign, I would say, totally positive, because that improves efficiency in the economy. But that just sort of tip of the iceberg. We don't know what's going to come in the coming weeks, days, weeks, whatever, months. So that will be much more clear down the road. I would say the only thing that tariffs are absolutely bad idea, and that will not make U.S. Sort of on more sustainable path. There's another sort of problem I believe is brewing, is that there is, I wouldn't say there is a conflict, but there's probably some under the hood fight going on between the head of U.S. Central Bank and incoming U.S. president or president-elect. He's not formally president yet, but effectively he is. And apparently there is clash between the two, which may make it more difficult down the road when the crisis will unfold to effectively deal with the crisis. So we'll see what things sort of what's gonna happen down the road. But the head of U.S. Central Bank or Federal Reserve, I would say he wasn't confrontational, but he was very firm during the press conference when he said that U.S. president has no right to fire him, and it was very unusual statement that he made. Let's put this way. Now let's and then the other thing that I want to mention about the elections in the U.S. It's very clear that that Donald Trump received popular sort of support and popular mandate on significant changes or reforms in the society in the U.S. because he effectively won the upper chamber of the parliament, the lower chamber, and also he personally got popular majority. So usually there's in the past he did not get let's put this way popular majority. It was through the system of electors, I believe, or representatives from each state, and that he got majorities basically through that system, but not actual popular majority. This time he got that. He increased support pretty much in all of the demographics. So it's very clear that the general population in the U.S. was fed up with the policies that of the current administration, and they won't change. And so they basically they gave carte blanche for Donald Trump for change, and we'll see if that's going to be sort of positive change or what he will be able to achieve in his position. Now let's move to the situation in Ukraine, where things are getting, say, from bad to worse. That's probably the best description for Ukraine. To be specific, and there's no light at the end of the tunnel. And the reason I'm stating that is because Ukrainian political and military leadership are completely incompetent, and I would say absolutely dangerous to survival of Ukraine due to their incompetency. And then the stemming from that, the corruption is really stems from incompetence, and that's sort of basically the symptom of the problem, essentially in Ukraine and in general everywhere. So there is because I know that many viewers are interested about this conversation about peace talks and so on. The reality is that the only way I see that really sustainable peace can be achieved is through compromise, where Ukraine is going to be neutral state, so it's not going to join NATO, it's not going to join EU, but it will preserve full territorial integrity, meaning that Russia will move its troops back behind the Ukrainian borders that existed on 1991. Otherwise, this whole situation will develop in quite negative direction for the West. And the reason I'm stating that is not because Russia is so great or there is some skills there. It's just because Ukraine is completely incompetent, much worse than Russia is, and so this path of least resistance tells that really means that Russia will eventually capture all of the Ukraine, and then the West will have to deal with the consequences of that. And that's unfortunate. In some way, it's a tragedy of Ukraine that it has completely incompetent leadership, both political and military, that leads to destruction of the country and obviously society. And that's that's another path, and at this point that's much more likely path where how things will unfold in the coming years around Ukraine. But again, going back to this situation with Ukraine, this is not sort of. It is obviously Russian invasion, but it's more bigger fight between Russia, China, and all of the satellite states versus the West, and redistribution of the wealth, power, and everything in favor of this alliance led by China and Russia. And so it's absolutely delusional to believe that Russia somehow will cede its relationship with China for very simple economic reason, because China is manufacturer of the world. So there is no this is natural that most countries are seeking to maintain relationship, because simply their well-being is dependent on China, because they import most of their goods from China and they outsource manufacturing effectively to China. And so you're naturally dependent and interested in maintaining a relationship with China no matter what. And so this sort of delusional thinking that is some kind of like 70s where there could be some agreement achieved, and they will sort of Russia will not gravitate to China, or China will not gravitate to Russia, is absolutely delusional. And then China really needs Russian resources, which are cheap, and reliable, because they can be delivered through land, not through the sea, which China does not control the sea, and can be sort of be in situation of sea blockade, and so Russia is extremely reliable source of resources that China lacks due to its population. So it's absolutely natural, very strong alliance that's driven by very objective forces, and it's unlikely to split apart, let's put this way. Now I'm going to start walk through in a clockwise fashion, starting from very north, and first we're going to jump into the Kursk region of Russia, where things more or less the same. Situation is definitely slowly but surely going in a negative direction for Ukrainian forces, to the point that Ukrainian president is talking or considering removing Ukrainian troops from Kursk region, but as I stated before, this was failure from day one. Even though tactically it was successful, extremely successful, I would say. But there was no strategy, and so therefore it was doomed, and eventually it would be doomed tactically. And so we kind of going through this phase of doom and failure in this Ukrainian attack. But at the same time, there's no major Russian territorial sort of gains in the Kursk region, and also there is no evidence of, or let's say objective evidence of presence of North Korean troops on the front line and participating in actual fighting. It's totally possible that they are somewhere in the rear, and that Russian command is essentially freeing up some of their forces that they were responsible for logistics, for rear guarding, and they being brought to the front line, and sort of North Korean troops essentially performing those duties. That's totally possible scenario, and I wouldn't be surprised that that's might be happening. But again, the amount of troops is simply not sufficient to sort of strongly tilt situation in favor of Russia. It's definitely helpful to have extra 10,000 troops, essentially one division. But again, it's not decisive number, and the amount of political problems, international problems it creates, it's just simply not worth it for Russia right now. Now let's look at the situation near Kharkiv. There were actually some Russian attacks. They were repelled, but situation more or less stable. There's no major movements on this section of the front line. Essentially, it's frozen. Now let's look at the North Lugansk section of the front line. And things here remain sort of in the same way, where there's strong Russian pressure across the entire section of the front line. Some minor advances of the Russian troops, and no major breakthroughs here so far. So I would say, generally speaking, it's okay, given that otherwise Ukrainian troops are completely on retreat pretty much everywhere. Now let's move south and let's look at the North Donbass front line. Northern sector remains pretty stable. Again, believe that Russian command simply doesn't have enough free troops or free resources to have any meaningful pressure here. There is some pressure around Chasiv, but again, without any major advances. And again, for the same reason, there is not enough resources to put strong enough pressure to move forward for Russian troops in command. Now let's look at the situation in the Central Donbass front line, where things are really collapsing for Ukrainian forces, for Ukrainian troops, and I'd say it's a disaster in the making. Russian troops continuing advance, the southern pincer in particular continuing advance. It's on the way of, I would say, approaching this village Rozlyv here, and this sort of very small river or stream, Sukhi Yaly, and there's a village there as well. So basically, Russian troops now are in the area. They're not attacking the villages themselves, that they have not sort of arrived to that point. Ukrainian commands threw everything they had, including even some logistical. Basically, they scrambled and pulled soldiers from everywhere, literally from all logistical units. Even medics were thrown into battle. So everybody who they can grab was thrown into battle. This allowed temporarily stop pretty quick Russian advance. There's still advance, but it's slowed down significantly. I believe it's a temporary situation. After most of those people will be lost. Pretty quick Russian advance will resume, and slow will continue. There's no question. Russian advances for the northern pincer are also happening, but they are much slower, much more modest. And actually, now let's look at that, at this whole situation where it stands right now. So this is Russian troops from the south advancing towards village Rozlyv, then Sukhi Yaly, and then there's fighting actually going on for village Uspennivka. And once Ukrainian forces are to lose this, it's gonna be pretty negative for this whole situation around Kurakhove. And even without that, with this current situation, it's essentially done deal that Ukraine is gonna lose Kurakhove and this whole area. Going from Rozlyv, Constantinople to Shevchenko, this whole area is gonna be lost. It's just a question of time. There's no question whether Ukrainian forces can keep or can sort of contain Russian advances. They cannot. They're not able to do counterattacks because the essential tool to throw Russian forces back is through counterattacks, and that's something that Ukrainian troops are not trained. Organizationally, they lacking. They're not able to do it. The leadership simply is not there. So therefore, it's again the path of least resistance. Russian advance will continue. There is nothing sort of super intelligent about what Russian command is doing. It's pretty straightforward, sort of textbook, but it's like it works, and so they continue using that strategy. And as I stated, the southern part, Russian troops continuing advance, and it's already creating problems for Ukrainian forces in Kurakhove and in this whole area south of Kurakhove. And then also from the northern direction, the Russian troops also advancing. At this point, they are attacking this village Sontsivka. When they capture, I'm not even saying if, it's question only when, then they capture this village, then essentially it will be probably the time how long Ukrainian forces can hold on to it will be very short. I know within a week or 10 days, Ukrainian forces will have to evacuate this whole area, including Kurakhove. So situation again is nearly disastrous, and it's probably going to get much more disastrous. And once this collapses, this essentially creates more opportunities and for fast Russian advances in the, generally speaking, western direction towards Dnipro River, and that's the whole problem with all of this. And this is just a look on how the situation looked on November 2nd. So this is Russian advance, as you can see. And this is what it used to be on October 28th, as you can see. That's sort of movement over this period of time. Now let's look at the situation on the Zaporizhya front line, and things here are more or less the same. There are some small losses by Ukrainian forces, but they are essentially not they're not meaningful from a big picture perspective. There's no any major village lost or anything, any major sort of point that's worth discussing right now. And then last section of the front line along the Dnipro River, which remains absolutely quiet. That's all for today. Thanks for watching. Until next time. Bye bye.